Hello, sixth grade, and welcome to Unit 1, Week 1 of Language Arts. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go over some notes. We'll start with our vocab and then move into our spelling and then some additional notes related to our grammar and so on. Our first vocabulary word for this week is going to be the word threshold. If someone crosses a threshold, they cross a gate or a door. So they're crossing through some kind of divider. An example sentence is Gavin crossed the threshold. Or if you want to use it in question form, you can say, what threshold did you cross today? Our next word is the word phobic. Phobic means you have a fear of something. There's something that you want to avoid, something you really don't like, you're afraid of, you don't want anything to do with it. So Matt is phobic with spiders, so he's afraid of spiders. And there are separate terms for the different kinds of phobias. So fear of spiders is arachnophobia, for example. But it comes from the word phobia or phobic. You can use it in a question and say, what are you phobic about? Your next word is the word glimmer. Glimmer is a subtle or a faint perception of something. There was a glimmer in her eyes that made me feel safe. So when you see just a little bit of something coming through, it's not very obvious, it's very small and maybe hard to notice. If you want to use it in question form, you can say, what are things that give you a glimmer of hope for the future? So what are some small things that make you feel hopeful? Next is the word sarcastic. So to be sarcastic is to be kind of sharp and contemptuous. And sometimes it's meant to be insulting, not necessarily all the time. So you can say he had a kind of sarcastic expression on his face. Or in question form, you can say, what are some examples of sarcastic comments? Next, we have the word consolation. A consolation is something that is meant to comfort someone when they're feeling any kind of loss or grief or sadness. So an example sentence is, flowers were purchased for the teacher as a consolation for the loss of his loved one. So a consolation comes from the word console, which means to comfort. And in question format, we can say, what are some events that may require consolation? So what are some things that may happen where you would want to comfort the person in front of you? Number 6 is the word heinous. A shockingly evil act is a heinous act. So heinous means really, really bad, not something small, something really large. An example sentence is, the young man committed a heinous crime. Or in question format, you can say, what heinous crimes have you heard about or seen on television? Number 7 is the word perception. Perception is your awareness of something, your mental or physical awareness or realization of something, how you perceive it. So in question format, you can say your depth of perception is off. So sometimes maybe you don't realize how far away something is or how close it is to you. That's your depth perception. So it's your understanding or awareness of what's around you. In question format, you can say, what perception do you have about education? So what thoughts or ideas do you have about it? Next and last for our vocabulary words this week is the word indispensable. So something that is indispensable is absolutely necessary or essential. You can't do without that thing. You need it. Mr. Green is an indispensable member of the team. So maybe he's super helpful. He knows how to do all the things. He knows how to help other people. He understands the job really well. So he would be someone who is indispensable. And in question format, we can say, what are some items that are indispensable to you? So what are some things that you can't do without, things that you need constantly all the time? All right, next, let's talk about our spelling words. So you're going to have 25 words. 20 of them will be your new words, 3 will be review words, and 2 will be challenge words. Each week, we're going to go over our words. One of your first assignments with your spelling words is to write them 3 times each. So we're going to get to that. Now, your words this week are all going to focus on short vowel sounds. I'm going to shrink this down just a bit so you can see all of them. Okay, we have the word gram, flash, dense, dread, crank, strict, drill, swan, prod, shrunk, scuff, clutch, threat, dwell, fund, text, rank, brink, mock, plaid, stuff, batch, sense, guest, and cleanse. Now, when you are going to be doing your 3 times each, it's going to be part of your homework. You're going to label it on top, spelling words, and you're going to put the unit and then the lesson number. So this is Unit 1, Week 1. You'll have your name and date neatly written in the top right-hand corner, and you're going to double space your writing. You're also going to leave at least a 2-finger space in between your words. So write your letters neatly, write your words neatly, space them out evenly. So these 2 are examples of a good way to do it. Please don't do this. Don't squash your words together. Don't write super tiny. Make sure it's clear and readable. Otherwise, I will ask you to redo it. All right, let's get into your notes. So this is going to be some basic review stuff in the beginning. So we're going to talk about different types of sentences. So a sentence shows a complete thought. It has to begin with a capital letter and end with some kind of punctuation. So a declarative sentence or a statement is what you've probably heard it called before, tells something. So to declare means to tell something or to share a piece of information. It ends with a period. So I can say, they went to the park yesterday. Begins with a capital, ends with a period, shares a piece of information. An interrogative sentence or a question asks something. So a question ends with a question mark and also begins with a period, with a capital letter. You can ask, what should we eat for dinner? That's an example of an interrogative sentence. An imperative sentence is a command. It tells you to do something. So a command or an imperative sentence begins always with a capital letter and it ends with either a period or an exclamation mark. So either way, regardless of the end punctuation on this one, it's telling someone to do something. And then we have an exclamatory sentence, which ends with an exclamation mark. It shows surprise, excitement, any kind of strong feeling. Now we also have sentence fragments. So the word fragment means a piece of something. It's incomplete. So if I say went to the park, you're going to ask me, well, who went to the park? I haven't given you a complete thought. So it's not a complete sentence. Or if I say the boy ate the, you'll ask me, the boy ate the what? What did he eat? So that also is another example of a sentence fragment. Now, for your comprehension section, we're going to be focusing on character, setting, and plot. So in fiction, whenever you're changing the setting, that often changes the characters' reactions and how they're behaving, and it also helps to shape the events and the things that are happening in the story, which are the plot. Now, by comparing and contrasting events that happen in different settings, this will help you to make inferences or guesses about the way characters may react or how they're going to act when certain things, if a certain event arises. The genre we're looking at is realistic fiction. So realistic fiction is a story that did not happen, but it contains all of the elements of a real story. So it could happen. Some of these elements include character setting and events that are like people, places, and events in real life. They have a narrator, and sometimes that narrator is one of the characters in the story. It'll include dialogue, descriptive details, and a lot of times it'll include illustrations. For your vocab strategy this week, we're going to be looking at context clues or paragraph clues. So a lot of times you'll be reading and you'll come across a word that you don't know. You don't know the meaning of that word. When this happens, the first thing you want to try to do is figure it out using your context clues. Now, context clues are words, sentences that are next to it, around it, that give you more information and they give you hints as to what that word may mean. So a couple ways that we find context clues is sometimes it can be an example that's given in the sentence. So in this sentence, I have the word canines bolded, and I don't know what the word canines means. So if I say the animal shelter had many canines, including pit bulls and huskies. Now, pit bulls and huskies are examples of the word canine, and we know that pit bulls and huskies are varieties of dogs. So we know that canines means dog. Now, you can also have a synonym of the word, which has a similar meaning. So if I say the child was aggravated or upset about losing their favorite toy, The synonym that comes immediately after it is the word upset. So we know that aggravated means upset, or it means something close to upset. Or you can find context clues in the form of an explanation that comes after the word. So if my word here is dilapidated, and I say the dilapidated house was broken down, the paint was peeling, and the windows were broken. So here I'm getting an explanation of what that word means. And I understand that dilapidated means something that's not being taken care of. How is it not being taken care of? It's run down, it's got peeling paint, nobody's fixed the broken windows. Now, we use context clues all the time without even thinking about it. So I'm going to give you an example with a word that I made up. Okay, so if I use the word flibbit, and I say, my flibbit barked all night and kept the family awake. Immediately, you've already figured out that flibbit probably means dog or something that's like a dog, because there's only so many animals that bark that you would keep in a house. And so immediately you're going to start to build those connections by using the clues around the word to figure out what that word means. All right, moving on. That takes us to the end of our notes. We're going to take a look at your weekly story. And this story is called Little Blog on the Prairie. Now, with your weekly stories, you definitely don't need to listen to them every time here. You can read them on your own. You can pull up the curriculum yourself and go through them online. You can take your book home, but make sure you're reviewing your stories often, because this is a story that your selection test, your weekly story test, is going to be about. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
Genre: realistic fiction. Little Blog on the Prairie by Kathleen Davitt Bell. Illustrated by Craig Orbach. Essential question: how do new experiences offer new perspectives? Read how an experience at a unique summer camp gives a teenage girl a whole new perspective on her life. Imagine for a moment that the year is 1890. No indoor plumbing, no refrigerators, no electricity, period. This is the life that 13-year-old Genevieve Welsh and her younger brother Gavin have to endure for the whole summer, since their mother has decided that the family's vacation will be spent at a frontier fantasy camp near Laramie, Wyoming. When the Welsh family arrives, all their modern conveniences, even to Jen's horror, her shampoo, are taken away and placed in storage by the camp's owners, Ron and his daughter Nora. Genevieve even has to wear the fashions of the 1890s, including long dresses and something called pantaloons. Will the family survive living together in a tiny log cabin? Mr. Welsh is afraid of almost all animals, but Genevieve at least has a head start. Before they left, she decided to hide her cell phone in order to keep in touch with her friends. Little does she know they will turn her text messages into a blog called Little Blog on the Prairie. Gavin opened the front door and the room was suddenly flooded with light. I could see colors outside, a bright blue sky, the intense green of the woods, the packed down dirt in front of the house, and some yellow weeds poking up through it. It looked cold, you can always tell. Like at early Saturday soccer games in the fall, when the field is almost silver-colored with dew, and you get clumps of grass clippings stuck in your cleats when you run. "Don't go out to explore yet," Mom called before Gavin crossed the threshold. "First wood, you too, Genevieve," she said. "We need a lot to keep this fire going." I called back, "How am I supposed to button this dress?" I couldn't reach behind my back to get it fastened. My mom took a break from the stove to come help, gathering her skirts in one hand and using the other to hold herself steady as she climbed the ladder. "You mean in 1890 you couldn't even get dressed without someone to help you with your buttons?" I said. "I guess not," my mom answered. Your dad got a little impatient this morning helping me with mine." And when she turned, I noticed he'd missed every other one. "Here," I said. But just as I was slipping the last button through its hand-sewn hole, we heard shrieking coming from outside. Before we could even start to wonder what it was, Gavin burst in. "You won't believe the chickens," he said, breathless, wild-eyed, his fingers splayed. He was shaking them out like they were wet. "Gavin?" my mom said. "What happened?" "They tried to kill me," he said. "Who?" answered my mom, making her way down the ladder as fast as she could. "Gavin!" she exclaimed once she was standing on the floor again and could focus on what he was saying. "Where's the wood you went to get?" "I got too scared," he said. "Scared? Of the chickens." He was mumbling now, like he was a little embarrassed, and he should have been. Who's afraid of a couple of chickens? Well, besides Dad. "Look," my mom said, "you can't all be phobic. Farm kids need to be tough, and you two are farm kids now. Those chickens are more afraid of you than you are of them." She pointed to a box next to the wood stove. "This is the wood box. In 1890, kids would have kept this box filled to the top all day long without ever having to be reminded. I know you are hungry and cold right now, but let's get off on a good footing. If you can take this on as a project, we'll all be warm and fed very soon." "But," Gavin started. "Oh, fine," I said. "I'll get the wood." I was thinking that if I could get out of the house, I'd warm up in the sunshine. But from the moment I took a step off the porch, I was pretty much attacked. Wings flapping, feathers flying, clawed feet leaping so high I was afraid for my face. There were screeches and squeals. I covered my eyes, tripping backward onto the porch, scrambling to stand up again, reaching blindly behind me for the door. It was the chickens. Gavin was right. They were going to poke out my eyes or peck off my toes. They would stop at nothing. "I think they're hungry," said Gavin when I was safely inside, panting, untangling my skirt from my legs. I swore my dress had been in on the attack, whipping this way and that, trapping me. "It took them a minute to find me," he continued. "They came from over by the barn, but now they know where we are. They're just waiting for us to come out again. They're guarding the door." "I don't think it's hunger," I said. "I think they hate us." "Here," said my mom, "give them this." She was holding some cornmeal in a tin cup. "You give it to them," I said. "I'm not going back out there." "Do chickens eat that?" asked Gavin. "What if that isn't something they even like? What if it makes them angrier?" "It does look a little thin," Mom said. "I'm not sure how they'd be able to peck it up off the ground." "Can I try a pinch?" asked Gavin. "You want it raw?" said my mom. Gavin just shrugged. "I'm hungry." "I'll try to light the fire with what we have inside," my mom said. "What time is it anyway?" I said. I was starting to get the feeling that it was really early in the morning, like bus stop early. "I don't know," my mom confessed, kind of laughing. "I don't know how you tell time out here. Ron gave your dad a watch yesterday, but he forgot to wind it, and now it's off. It's funny, all these little things, isn't it?" "Ha," I said in a way that I hoped communicated that funny was dead last in a list of words describing all these little things, with annoying, unnecessary, and unfair coming closer to the top. Just then my dad approached the cabin. I could tell because I heard the chickens start screaming and squealing, followed by Dad letting out a surprised, "Oh!" Then he must have started to run because the screaming and screeching got louder and I could hear wings flapping. My dad burst through the door, out of breath, feathers floating in a cloud around his legs. He slammed the door behind him. "They're just chickens," my mom said. "I don't know why you all are so afraid." My dad didn't answer her. His face was white. I think one of them was foaming at the mouth, he said. Beak, my mom corrected. Birds carry disease, he said. He placed the bucket of water on the table and held out his hand to examine it. I guess it didn't break the skin. My mom rolled her eyes, reaching behind herself to straighten her bun, then peering into the bucket of water. It's only half filled, she said. Some of it spilled while I was running the gauntlet just now, he said. I hope there's enough for coffee. I was going to make grits, my mom said. It's fast, and we have cornmeal. Do I like grits? Gavin asked. What are grits? I said. You're going to make coffee first, my dad said, because I need coffee before I can take on one more thing today. His teeth were chattering. He pointed to the cookbook from 1882. Does that show you how to make coffee? Do we even have coffee? My mom lifted the lid on a trunk. There were some bags and a few tins in it. She pulled out a wooden box with a crank on the top and a tin box with a lid. Coffee, she said brightly. It was pathetic how she was trying to act like she was in a good mood and trick the rest of us into agreeing with her. Is there orange juice? Gavin asked. How can there be orange juice if there isn't even a refrigerator? I said. How can there be no refrigerator? Gavin asked. We've got to light this fire, my mom said. We've got to get me some coffee, said my dad. My mom had put a match to the fire in the stove, and after a few smoke-filled attempts, finally got it going when we had our first visitor. Those hungry chickens were like a doorbell, squealing and squawking. I knew somebody was in the yard. My mom was too busy flapping air into the stove with the bellows to notice, but I opened the door a crack to peek out. It was Nora. I watched her, wanting to see how an experienced farm person managed around killer fowl. A muzzle? A shotgun? But the thing is, when the chickens saw it was Nora, they didn't even attack. Hey, Pumpkin, I watched her say to one of the chickens. Just the sound of her voice seemed to calm them down. Hey, Daisy. She pulled a handful of something out of her pocket and tossed it on the ground. Daisy and Pumpkin scrambled to peck at it. It didn't look like cornmeal. I would have stepped into the yard and asked her what she was giving them, but when she looked up, there was a glimmer of something in her eyes that made me afraid to talk to her. Instead of saying hi to me or anything like that, Nora shook her head like I wasn't there and said, "The new folks never feed." Those poor chickens. And if you'd fed them and shut them in the coop like my dad told you to last night, she added, meeting my gaze, you'd be eating eggs for breakfast this morning, instead of what all it is you're planning to make without milk or eggs. With that, she stepped inside and walked around the cabin like she owned it, which I guess technically she did, but still. She pulled the drawer out of the coffee grinder and looked inside, nodding briefly to show my dad that she approved. My mom had finally closed the door to the stove, and Nora opened it again, inspected the fire, added 2 pieces of kindling, then closed the door and changed the vents in the door and the side of the stove until they met her approval. Breakfast plans? She asked my mom, not even bothering to expand that thought into a full sentence. Grits, my mom said, and Nora nodded, neither approving nor disapproving. Better with a little salt pork if you can spare it, she said. Then she jutted her chin toward a shelf where all the dishes were stacked. Tin plates, a stack of tin cups. Nora said, "Coffee pot's up there." I looked over at my dad, hoping to get some kind of a reading from him on Nora. He didn't disappoint. He had a kind of sarcastic expression on his face. Nora turned to me like a teacher who hears a kid talking in the middle of class. "You're Genevieve, right?" she said. How old are you? I'm 13, I said, but I turned 14 in September. I'll be in high school. I don't know why I needed to tell her that, other than the fact that the term high school felt comforting. It was nice to remind myself that Nora, or no Nora, at some point all of this would be over, and I'd be back with Kristen and Ashley in the world where I belonged. I'm 14, Nora said, but I'll be 15 in October, so I guess that makes me a full year older than you. Almost, I said. What? Almost a full year, I said. I knew I was being picky about it, but she was wrong, and that should count for something when you're acting like you are the biggest expert on everything in someone else's house. My birthday's in September, so we're actually 11 months apart. As if I hadn't said a word at all, Nora reached up to the dish shelf, pulled down a tin cup, and used it to scoop water from the bucket and pour it into the pump mounted on the counter. She pumped vigorously and poured more water into the pump until water started flowing out of the pump on its own. You've got to prime the pump in the mornings, she said, especially when the place stands empty a few days. Meanwhile, my mom had put the coffee grounds in the pot and was starting to heat up the water for the grits. Will you stay for breakfast? She asked Nora. Nah, Nora shook her head. I've got chores and lessons. And shoot, we get up at 4:30 in the summer. For me, it's closer to dinner time than it is to breakfast. It's almost nighttime? Gavin asked. Did you really just say shoot? I asked. Nora ignored my question. No, dinner's what you eat at the noon meal, she said, and we're having chicken and dumplings. I wish I had been stronger. I wish we all had. But at the mention of chicken and dumplings, and I didn't even know what that was, except something they had for dinner in the song She'll Be Comin' Round the Mountain, I felt my spine go limp. It was as if all the bones in my body had been replaced by longing for whatever chicken and dumplings were. One look at Gavin, Mom, and Dad told me they were feeling exactly the same way. We were all leaning toward Nora as if we might smell the hot food coming off her. I'm sure you'll be having stuff like that in no time, she said. And I knew that what she really meant was that we probably wouldn't have a meal like that until we got home and drove straight from the airport to a restaurant. Grits, which we sat down to eat as soon as Nora was gone, taste exactly like what they are. Cornmeal mixed with water. I don't think they're supposed to be crunchy or have a smoky flavor, but these did. Why did we come here again? I said after taking my first bite. My mom said, they're better with butter. My dad said, and when they're not burnt. My mom pushed her dish away and stood up to pump water in a bowl to do the dishes, and my dad said, you're going to boil some for that washing, right? The only thing that would make it worse out here is if one of us got dysentery. My mom said, don't you have some work to do outside? And Dad stood, took one more bite, then left the cabin. My mom turned to me. Genevieve, she said, it will be your job to clear the table, scrape the food off the plates into a bowl for the animals, and clean the dishes after the meal. You can also make the beds, and I'll expect you to set the table and sweep out the house after every meal. When you're done, you can help your dad in the fields. I stood there and stared at her. I turned the phone off and slipped it into my pocket. I did this every time I sent a text, promising myself I wouldn't get it out again until much later. I didn't want to get caught, and I didn't want to run down the battery. But then 2 seconds would pass and I'd find myself reaching for it again. I couldn't help it. It was like the way Gavin sneaks his candy from the jar on top of the fridge where my mom makes him keep it. I had to have some weeding done when my dad got back, though, so I swore that this time I'd keep the phone in my pocket. My dad had gone to get us water, taking Gavin along with him. Before we'd headed out to the cornfield, my dad sat Gavin, my mom, and me down on the edge of the porch to tell us what we needed to know about bears. "I assume you're not talking about the Chicago football team," my mom had said. "They could be anywhere," my dad replied. When Gavin said, "Seeing a bear would be so cool," my dad hunched his shoulders up toward his ears, drew his bushy eyebrows together, and stood over him. "Bears are no joke," he growled. "You have to be careful, especially in the woods." Gavin had been swinging his legs, but now he stopped. "You're scaring him," said my mom. "You kind of look like a bear right now," Gavin said. "You should be scared," Dad said to Gavin, but he backed away. "If you want to avoid a bear, the best thing to do is make sure they know where you are. Call out to them as you walk. Call out, 'Bear, bear.'" "They speak English?" I asked. "Do you know what you do if you see a bear?" my dad asked. "Run?" I said. "Never run. I'm telling you." He looked at each one of us hard. "If you see a bear, stay put. Wave your hands above your head. It will make the bear think you're bigger than you are, that you're not worth attacking." He was demonstrating, but with the sun behind him, he looked like he was performing a rain dance. "And if they come for you anyway, what you do is you crouch down on the ground." He showed us this too, his forehead in the dirt, his knees tucked under his chest, his arms covering the back of his head. His voice was muffled, but he still managed to shout out, "The idea here is that you're using your body to protect your vital organs. Better to have the bear rip some meat off your back than to puncture your lungs or heart." Now, all alone in the cornfield, I thought, "Ugh, meat." Week 1, Monday, 11:41 a.m. Are there really bears out there? My dad said if you're all by yourself, you should sing to keep them away. Week 1, Monday, 11:42 a.m. But the way I sing, a bear might attack me just to make me stop. I heard something rustling behind me and I jumped. I stashed the phone thinking it must be my dad. But then when I called out, "Dad," and the sound of my voice died unanswered in the great openness of the field with the mountains beyond, I started to get a little freaked out. "They told him, don't you ever come around here," I started, my voice warbly and small. "Beat It" was the only song I knew all the words to because my 6th grade gym teacher had made us learn a dance to it. I went on a little bit louder. I wanted to be sure a bear could hear. Holding the hoe in 2 hands, I brought the blade down on a clump of weeds growing up around a cornstalk. You have to hit them at the root, and it's not always easy to figure out where they are. This time, I took down the corn plant as well. I'd been doing that a lot. The next time, I didn't hit the corn. I started doing a little dance in time to the song, hacking away at the weeds. I was belting it out, but who cared? Except for the bears, I was completely alone. I was already on the 3rd verse when I noticed Gavin and my dad 10 feet away, listening. Gavin said, "Yeah, the 80s," and I felt my face go hot. I went back to my weeding in silence. Week 1, Monday, 1:24 p.m. You know what's worse than being caught by your little brother singing "Beat It" at the top of your lungs while you do a little corn weeding dance? Having him follow you down the row, doing a little dance of his own, and stopping only to say, "Come on, Jen, you know you're feeling it," all morning long. Week 1, Monday, 1:29 p.m. My one consolation is that last night Gavin got a mosquito bite on his eyelid and it's swollen so bad he can't open that eye. Actually, it kind of makes me feel bad for him. After lunch that day, grits again because my mom hadn't figured out how to cook anything else. We went back into the field. I was able to text again when it was my turn to fetch water, and that's how it went over the next few days. Heinous chores, stolen moments to text, lots of singing and calling out to bears who may or may not have been listening.
All right, that takes us to the end of our story. Remember, this story is going to be the one that your weekly selection test is going to be about. So make sure you reread it and practice it throughout the week. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.